Thank you. I want to thank Richard. He's been wonderful to work with, and the staff of, this has a wonderful staff at the University of Richmond. It's really a wonderful group of people to work with. And I got the idea to offer this to Richard a few years back. I think the university has had a program in American ceramics that's really something you think a major American museum should be doing. I mean, he's taken on three exhibitions I can think of with accompanying publications. I saw the Lenox show here. When they had a Lenox show, I came to see the show, and I thought this would be a great place to have the Waylande Gregory exhibition. And so I think that the interest in American ceramics is very sincere here, and I think it's terrific. I also saw the Faience show at the Brooklyn Museum, and I took a group of people to see it too. I thought that exhibition was wonderful too. So I think what they're doing on American ceramics here is very commendable. I also want to acknowledge Bianca Brown, who's not here tonight. She was a close friend of Waylande Gregory's widow, Yolanda, and helped take care of her in the last 10 years of her life. And something unexpected came up. She had her plane ticket and everything, but couldn't be here, and I just want to acknowledge her because she gave me total access to the Waylande Gregory records, to the archives, and having access to a lot of material really helps if you want to do a book. It was really terrific that I had stuff that no one has seen before, really, since Gregory was alive. So that, and I appreciate her opening that up to me. When I was, let me move on to first picture. Okay. When I was doing research on Gregory, there was stuff in museum libraries all over the Northeast and in the Midwest. There was really a lot of stuff. And I was thinking of, are there connections to the South? He must have had some connection to the South, and this statue is it, okay? His connection to the South. This is his second bather, executed around 1934. And she was exhibited at the Richmond Museum in Richmond on February 5th to 20th, 1944. And she is life-size. She's 40-some inches tall. And my friends and relatives, we lovingly call her Naked Virginia. So it was a favorite of his, too. It's remarkable because he's the first, Gregory is important, he's the first ceramicist to do monumental ceramic sculptures in modern times. So this is something new, to make a ceramic sculpture that's not made in pieces. This is made of one piece and fired just once. Then this is a remarkable kind of accomplishment for him. And this is a favorite of his. Here she is on the patio of his house. He had a house that he designed. He was friends with Frank Lloyd Wright. And he was influenced by Wright's California designs, really not suited to New Jersey, but this house is in Warren, New Jersey. And it overlooked a precipice. Today Route 22 is below it, but you can see a vista. You can see the New York skyline in the distance. You can see New Brunswick. You can see the whole area around it. So he was high up on this place, and he designed it out of cement blocks. Like I said, influenced by what Frank Lloyd Wright did in Los Angeles. And you could see the figure of Virginia. I call her Virginia over here on the porch. And she's life-size. You can see how big she is. And you can see even the modern furniture he used. So this was a very modern kind of place for its time. Now, I think she is a wonderful, we're going to go back. Let's go back. Yeah. Wonderful example of American Art Deco. He's a leading figure of American Art Deco. Some people may not be familiar with Art Deco. If you asked Waylande Gregory, is this Deco? He'd say, huh? You know, like, what's that? You know, it's a word that happened in the 1960s by antique dealers. But it comes from an actual exhibition of 1925 in Paris, the Exposition d'Arts Décoratifs in Paris, and from that they got the name Art Deco, and it stuck. So it's a terminology that came later than the actual period, but it relates to an actual exhibition that started the movement in Paris. New York was very important with Art Deco. Most of the major buildings are not in Paris. They're in New York City. They're the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, the Rockefeller Center. Radio City Music Hall. These are major Deco buildings. So New York was just as important as Paris, really, in development of Art Deco. And probably the best American Deco ceramics are by Waylande Gregory. Okay. Now, how did he make his sculptures? Okay, he had to make this. He had to develop something new. When you put ceramic sculptures in a kiln, you need to have an armature, something to support them, so they hold up. If you use wood, it'll burn. To put these in a kiln, it's over 1,000 degrees. So wood would burn, metal would melt. So he developed something called the Honeycomb Technique, which is he made these an infrastructure of compartments underneath that would support the sculpture from within when it's getting fired. This makes them very heavy today. But that's what he did, and he made them in one piece. Now, he's not the first person in the history of Western art to make gigantic ceramic sculptures. The first were the Etruscans, who live in Tuscany, what is Tuscany today. And this is an Apollo, figure of Apollo from an Etruscan temple. They were all destroyed, none exist today. But they put terracotta figures on the roof, and they developed the use of terracotta. And I'm not an expert on Etruscan terracottas, but from what I understand is they cheated. They didn't make them, they fired them once like Gregory did, but they did not make them out of one piece. They made different pieces and assembled them together, which is, in my mind, cheating. He made them out of one piece. And they're hollow like a bunny. Think of a chocolate bunny rabbit. That's what they're like. So that's exactly what they're like. His anatomy is way much better than this, because if you teach art history, you see shallow drapery folds, that means they don't understand anatomy. If you see deep drapery folds, they understand anatomy. So see how shallow they are? So they're trying to look at the figure from the clothes into they're not seeing the nude figure beneath the clothes. But anyway, Gregory did. So he knew about the Etruscans, and he went to Tuscany. I'll get to that later on. Also from Tuscany is this. In the Renaissance, there was a Terracotta Revival. This is by Luca della Robbia. He's one of the 5 founders of the early Renaissance in Florence. And this is Florence Cathedral, called the Duomo. And he had a different kind of glaze that he used. He had the idea of doing outside ceramic sculptures, but in reliefs. And Gregory doesn't like to acknowledge influences from anybody, but he did acknowledge Luca della Robbia. So this is the Resurrection from Florence Cathedral, 1446. And it's a tympanum over the doorway, which tympanum is a lunette over a lintel. And you can see Gothic is going away. The arch is still a little pointed. It's not totally round on top, but the Renaissance is coming on. But these kind of tin glazes could take weather. So Gregory was very much influenced by him in doing outdoor ceramic sculpture, relief ceramic sculpture. Later on, we're going to look at a sculpture he did, a huge one, in Washington, D.C., which was outdoors, still outdoors today. So that's definitely an influence on him. Now, turning to Gregory himself. Okay. Gregory was born June 13th, 1905 in Baxter Springs, Kansas. He was very advanced as a child. He was very good in music and in art. In fact, when he was like 5 or 6 years old, he actually had one of his musical pieces printed. He had it published. And it was called Kitty Wobble. And it was a rag because he was imitating the movements of his cats. And that got the name Kitty Wobble, and it became a popular tune, actually, going back to, I guess, 1910, something like that. Here he is as a young man with I don't know who this young lady is, but with a paper moon. And I looked up the song, and the song, It's Only a Paper Moon, doesn't happen until the 30s. So they had paper moons way before the song became popular. So he went to a very advanced school in Kansas. His mother really supported him. People think of Gregory as being like Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but actually his mother was a combination of Spanish and Italian, and very, very temperamental. And he's really much more like his mother than like his father. She put him in a very advanced school, the the State Normal Training School in Kansas. And his 1922 report card, which is in the archives, shows what his interests were when he was very young, a teenager. He got an A in watercolor and advanced modeling. He got A's in both of those, because that makes sense, he's an artist. And then he got B+ in geography, and B- in American literature, and C in American history. So he pretends he likes history, but he's really not so good with history. In 1924, he moves to Chicago and becomes friends with Lorado Taft. And Lorado Taft was a major sculptor in Chicago. He was old when Gregory met him, and he's supposed to be with his assistant for 18 months. He stayed for 3 years. This was at the end of Taft's career. He was very prominent. He studied in Paris, Lorado Taft. He studied the École des Beaux-Arts. And he knew about the French casting techniques and French sculptural techniques. At that time, the French were really leading the world in sculpture. So he learned all about sculpture in France, which was the best place to study it, and then came to Chicago and was very prominent in the Columbian Exposition in Chicago of 1893. And he was a great teacher. Two of the finest women sculptors in American art, Bessie Padovano and Janet Scudder, were both his students. But this period of like the American Renaissance, very Beaux-Arts in taste, is not what Gregory's interested in. He's coming there in the 1920s. But he did progress somewhat, Lorado Taft, and he did a series of fountains, in fact. This is a very famous Lorado Taft enormous sculpture in Chicago. The theme is the Fountain of Time. And Gregory described it himself as concrete aggregate of marble and granite chips. And it shows 100 allegorical figures before Father Time. And this is how Gregory described the work, because he really admired Taft quite a bit, although he was more old-fashioned artistically than his taste. He described it as, quote, the ebb and flow of humanity in a majestic sculptured mass, swinging in a wide circle in a great procession, ever impelled by the winds of destiny, in the exorable lockstep of the ages. This gigantic sculpture shows the waves of mankind rising from the unknown in successive waves, briefly in pleasure, suffering, and power, before the stern, immovable figure of time. So it's really quite a moving statue, and you can see in Chicago today. It's enormous. But he might have gotten the idea of doing fountains also from Lorado Taft. And then at the end of studying with Taft in 1928, he went on a trip to Europe with him. And Gregory is at the far left. And Taft is like the fourth one in. He's the portly man with the coat over his shoulder and the hat. That's Lorado Taft. So this is the plane. It's kind of scary looking in my opinion, but they're taking this plane from London to Paris. But in Gregory's notes, he only mentions Notre Dame in Paris. I mean, we don't know what he saw there. That's where Art Deco was happening. Doesn't say anything about what he saw, but he really focuses on what he saw in Tuscany. And he loves everything Italian, so he likes what he could see in Tuscany is the Etruscans and Della Robbia. So that's what obviously what he studied in Tuscany. He was lucky that after this trip, he started working for Cowan Pottery in 1928. And Cowan Pottery was one of the last American art potteries, and it would soon go out of business because of the Depression. But so he decided, he learned all about ceramics from Guy Cowan, the owner of the pottery. And Cowan had been a student himself at Alfred, where he learned all about glazes and how to produce ceramics. So Gregory put the two things together, really. He learned about sculpture from Taft, and he learned about ceramics from Cowan. And when you put it together, you have ceramic sculpture, is what he did. So it was a leading American art pottery at the time. The lady that you see here on the screen is Gilda Gray. Her real name, she was Polish. Her name was really Marianna Michalowska, and she was a Ziegfeld Follies girl. By 1922, she was one of the most popular Ziegfeld Follies girls, and she was more of a dancer, actually, than a singer. And she lost all her money in the Great Depression, in the stock crash, and she was forced to perform in Cleveland, and that's where Gregory met her. And he wanted her to pose for him, but she'd only do it on stage, so he could sit on the side of the stage and watch her dances. And he wasn't interested in her portrait. And if you notice on this photograph that's in the archives, it says, "To Waylande Gregory, something like my favorite sculptor." So she became the subject for 2 sculptures by him that were very important at Cowan. This is the first one, the Norge Dancer. Now, the Norge Dance is an Eastern Indian dance where the skirt at the bottom is like a hula hoop, and when she's dancing, it kind of bounces up and down on her body to give that kind of effect. He described a different dance by her, Waylande Gregory, so I'll read you his description of when he saw her dancing. Quote, "During the time I lived in Cleveland, the late Gilda Gray came to town for a week's performance. He was a master artist. Her Oriental Norge dances were a complete surprise and a revelation of art to me. Her costumes for the Norge dance consisted of diaphanous veils over her head and shoulders. On her arms and ankles were bells and Hindu jewelry of fantastic design. She wore gypsy-like voluminous skirts and flared and swirled. One was covered with black mirror discs sewn into the material, so that as she danced in the spotlight, thousands of reflected stars were projected all over the theater, and the entire place became alive with points of light and darkness. She was the center of a swirling nebula. Everything was caught up in her movement. The walls, the ceiling, the audience all swam in this whirling orbit of scintillating light, pivoted by her revolving sculptural figure." As you can see, the face is really nothing on this. It's about her dance. That's what's important. So this was an edition of 1 out of 50, but they may have never made 50. In those days, if it wasn't filled, they just stopped making them. Another interesting statue is this one. And I wondered who the model for this was. And what happened was, an early title for this is called the Shimmy Dance. So I looked who did the shimmy, and it was Gilda Gray. She's the one who invented the shimmy, apparently, according to dance history. And in the Shimmy Dance, she was an embarrassing moment. She had to perform on stage the national anthem. So she forgot the words. So she began to shake her hips and shoulders to do something, and that became the shimmy. And you could see the movement. She's really not moving her legs here. It's like the movement of her body without moving her lower legs. So I'm pretty sure that this is who, I'm sure it's also a portrait of Gilda Gray. So Cowan Pottery went out of business because of the Great Depression. He had to find another job. He's one of the first important potters to shift from ceramics, to shift from art pottery, like the Cowan pottery, to studio pottery, like he's going to do at Cranbrook. Cranbrook was and still is a very important school of American design in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. We're lucky that this exhibition is going to travel there. And some major figures in American design were either faculty members or were students. And he taught there for a year and a half. And but at Cranbrook, he had to do all the production himself. He had to model it himself. He had to, the major pieces no longer made with molds like the pieces at Cowan. He had to model it himself. He had to fire it himself. He had to glaze it. So he did everything on his own, just the way an artist or a sculptor or a painter makes stuff in their studio. So that's the idea, that he became one of the really first studio artists when he was teaching at Cranbrook. George Booth was the money behind Cranbrook, and it's really 4 schools, four schools today. And it's the Art Academy, and a boys' high school, and a girls' high school called Kingswood. And in fact, the Romneys went to school there, both husband and wife. It's beautiful. Bloomfield Hills is a beautiful place. It's a great place to visit too. So he made some of his finest works when he was teaching at Cranbrook, including Kansas Madonna. This is Kansas Madonna. This is in the exhibition. And some people might be upset by the religious title that he used here. and putting religious overtones in a painting of a mare and a colt. But it has a very regionalist kind of feeling. Makes me think of this. Oh wait, that's Kansas Madonna, I'm sorry. That's Kansas Madonna, which is the mother and the colt. And this is, everybody knows, the most famous American painting, Grant Wood's 1929 American Gothic. And the religious overtones in this too. It's called Gothic because he was influenced by Netherlandish painting of the 15th century, this very detailed kind of look. But in the background, we have a plate glass window, which is Gothic. You know, does it talk about spiritual poverty in the Midwest? It's really a joke. I mean, he was joking with his own audience. This is not like the colored glass in Chartres Cathedral. This is the Midwestern religious experience he's kind of poking fun at. And notice how the farmer, who's really his dentist posed for the farmer, is holding a pitchfork like the devil. So, you know, this is not what we think of the Madonna and Child, but maybe in Kansas that's as close as they come to it, I don't know. But that's a major piece. Then he had problems at Cranbrook too. He had a problem with Booth that there was a bank holiday at Cranbrook, and he put all his pieces in a kiln that he had constructed there. And Mr. Booth ordered all the electricity turned off while he had his pieces in the kiln that were being fired, and many of them were ruined. So he finished up that semester, and Booth and Gregory sued each other, and there was a washout in the end. Neither one really won. But it was still a very, excluding the kiln disaster at Cranbrook, it was a very productive period, but he was only there for a year and a half. Okay. Kansas Madonna became a very famous work by Whitney did an exhibition on American sculpture, was on the cover. And in 1937, Kansas Madonna was illustrated in Fortune magazine, the December issue. And it noted that the sculpture was the most expensive one in the whole exhibition, selling for $1,500. He never sold it, but it was the most expensive one. So after the Cranbrook incident, he moved to New Jersey, and he bought a rundown farm in Metuchen, New Jersey, called Goose Cottage. At the same time, he had an apartment in New York City at 227 East 57th Street. While he was there, he created his first fountain. And I'm going to show you the maquette for that, which is in the show, in the exhibition. This is the maquette for the swimmer. And in his New York City apartment, which was reviewed actually, the big version of this, which is about so high, must be 40 inches high or 35 inches high, was in the center of a pool with fish. And he got his idea starting to play with the combination of very glassy glazes. This has a remarkable glaze that's very, very glass-like. It's kind of opalescent in person. And you can even see it dripping on her thigh. You can see the glaze dripping. So this interest in glass is beginning to grow at the same time. And later on, he's going to move the fountain to New Jersey. But the first fountain he did is this fountain that's in his apartment in New York City. Then he became the director for sculpture of the WPA in New Jersey. And you can see this today. Let's see here. Okay, so the WPA started the New Deal in October 1935. And people think of the WPA, the first thing people think of is post office murals. And there are 2,500 murals all over the country. And some of them are actually sculptures. And Gregory actually did one that's in Kansas. That's a post office mural. So this is a new project that he did. This is called Light Dispelling Darkness in New Jersey. And you can see it today. It's a tribute to Thomas Edison, the idea of light dispelling darkness. And it's in Roosevelt Park, actually, which is next to Menlo Park. It's kind of confusing, but Roosevelt, you know, is a big deal in the Depression. Anyway, he started making sculptures much larger than the ones at Cranbrook, and he used the Atlantic Terracotta Company in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. They also made terracottas for major New York skyscrapers like the Woolworth Building and Flatiron Building. And architects were turning away at that time, when, in the 30s, from architectural kind of ceramic kind of decoration. So he wanted to revive the idea of the WPA. He hired 10 really immigrant guys to help him on this project. And they worked for months on the project. And he did these really monumental, about this high each, sculptures in terracotta. The central core are the good people, the scientists, the educators, that are going to free people from problems. On top is a terracotta globe. You can see this today on, on the highway. And there are 6 vices that are around that are these big, large glazed terracotta sculptures. One is called Greed. It's 2 octopuses strangling each other. Then there's one that's called Materialism. It's very interesting. It's a hydra, and each one has a human face. On the hydra, the idea of the hydra is you chop one head off and 2 grow in its place. So it's a monster with human heads and a ticker tape relating to Wall Street and the stock market crash. And the rest of the 4 horses of the apocalypse are the other ones. And this one is Pestilence. I like this guy. I like his outfit. I like this blue outfit with the bright yellow dots. It kind of has a pop art quality to it, a comic book quality. So this is a sculpture, a WPA statue that is still, you can see in New Jersey today. And it was restored about 5 years ago. Oh, I'm sorry, this is Pestilence. So you can see Pestilence. This is Pestilence with the yellow dots. And they're very much. What? This would be 36, completing 36. Shown at the Newark Museum. They had the whole thing in the Newark Museum before that. And they took it there. Okay, another one from, another very important one is his big relief sculpture in 1941. Okay, I got this right. Okay, 1941. This is Democracy in Action, which is a great subject, and it's kind of sarcastic, actually. And it depicts the Metropolitan Police Department and the District of Columbia Fire Department. It's 81 foot long and 8 feet high, and it comprises 518 glazed, 14-inch glazed terracotta tiles. And the firemen are doing good things. The police, not so good, some of them. If you listen to what's happening in California today. But anyway, oh, wait, this goes this way. Okay. This is the central panel, most important panel of the maquette for the work, and you could actually see it better here. And it shows a confrontation between what seems to be policemen and black men. And it was noted, some people really protested this, but it's still at the police department today. So one Washington policeman said, well, this sculpture is from New York. These are like New York City police that beat up on people. We're Washington police, don't do anything like that. And moving on to the World's Fair, his big heyday was the New York World's Fair in 1939. And he acted as an advisor to the World's Fair, and even got friends from Cleveland, got them jobs at the World's Fair. Now this picture, this one. Okay, this one is from the World's Fair. And the most iconic buildings, they're Wallace Harrison's. These are not sculptures, these are buildings, the Trilon and the Perisphere. And in front of it is General Motors, where Gregory had 2 exhibitions. He had the imports and exports displays that had groups of his terracotta sculptures on display in there. But when you think of the World's Fair, what you really think about Gregory is the Fountain of the Atom, which this is, and it was really amazing. And in the exhibition, there are 4 figures, 4 electrons from the actual World's Fair that are here. The Fountain of the Atom had a framework. The framework was a steel frame with glass bricks that were lit from within. There was a bluish-green pool 65 feet in diameter and had 2 concentric tiers of terraces. The first was wider than the second. On the lower terrace were 8 electrons, 4 male and 4 female. Today, we have 2 male electrons and 2 female electrons. But it's very similar, really. So there were 8 altogether. Each were about 50 inches high, and they relate to the valence shell of the atom. And on top of that were the 4 elements, which were extremely huge. They were about 72 inches tall each. And those are very heavy. They can weigh over a ton. Also, an interesting person coming to the fair was Albert Einstein. Came to the fair and commented, met Gregory. And then later on, Gregory went to Princeton to sculpt him, and you'll see his portrait, Gregory's portrait of Einstein, in the exhibition. Okay. I'm just showing you the stuff from the World's Fair. This is the figure of Earth from the World's Fair. She's 72 inches. She's been purchased 2 years ago by the Philadelphia Art Museum. And she's sitting on a throne of minerals and holding minerals. Now, it's odd that he calls her virginal, and earth goddesses usually not virginal. They're mothers, they're not virginal. But this is her features are, it's a beautiful statue, but her features are a bit on the harsh side. I almost like the maquette better. This is the maquette for her, which has softer, more appealing features. Beautiful. This is one of his best maquettes. And so there were 4. Earth was female, fire was female, and there's a version of fire in the show. And male were air, and water were male. Cranbrook has the male version, the big version from the fountain. Okay, and this is on the cover of the book. This is one of the electrons. And the same kind of honeycomb technique. So these weigh about between 300 to 500 pounds each, and 4 of them are right here. And his estate donated this one to the Richmond Museum. This one is another one, which is really beautiful too, with bubbles and color. By 1942, he was no longer making monumental ceramic sculptures. He changed in what he was doing, and things after the war made things a bit different too. Artists all over, artists and design people all decided that independently decided the middle class taste was horrible and it's something to avoid. So what they did was they had basically 3 approaches, I think. One was to lampoon it, criticize it, make fun of it like pop art did, and like Jeff Koons, make fun of middle class taste. And that's one way. Another way is like Jackson Pollock or Donald Judd. You intellectualize it so it doesn't appeal to middle class at all. They don't understand it. And then the third way, what Gregory did, is bring it to a new audience, charge much too money so they can't afford it. So that's what Gregory did. So he went to the leading department stores with these designs that he had, and he was very, very successful for 20 years making these designs for department stores, including Neiman Marcus, Gumps, Marshall Fields, Tiffany's. All the leading stores in America carried his stuff. And he would go to the openings and sell stuff and meet people, and it went on for 20 years. The focus was dinnerware, actually, and he also, made pieces for centerpieces. So he made porcelains. So these are he loved doing birds. There's a lot of birds in the exhibition, actually. This is his peacock. This is a jeweled peacock that actually has little plastic, I guess they are, jewels added on later. So this would be in the center of the table, surrounded by plates with peacocks or other birds. And he continued some of his earlier designs too, continued them like the polo players, zebras, deer. He continued them beyond the 30s. And here we have a rooster and a toucan, and these were the same thing. These were made to be very, very high-end decorative pieces, and really, really major kind of American porcelains for the time. Other companies that people collect, like Roseville and Stengel and things, big department stores didn't want to carry that stuff. That was middle class. He was appealing to a higher kind of moneyed audience. Okay, now I know some of the prices that he had from a Mary Ryan, another upscale establishment. That lists the prices. His fantail pigeons were $32. The toucans were $50. The roosters were $65. And the peacocks were $65. You're talking about 40s. Yeah, 40s. Yeah, 40s. I mean, this is a lot of money. People don't make $65 in a week. So he's selling them for a lot of money. And my favorite one, this one from this stuff, is Lobster Plate. And in 1947, the New York Herald Tribune described a showing of Gregory's at Hammacher Schlemmer as, quote, "Probably the most spectacular of the plates are the red ones, carved with white flamingos. The birds have gold beaks and appear as figurines too. Gold seahorses whirl over white porcelain plates, and there's a spectacular fish platter with dashes of gold and red lobster right down the center." So it was noticed, and apparently this is the only one made. The estate felt this is the only one he ever did. So this is the one that Hammacher Schlemmer was talking about, and that they had in their store when it was reviewed. What's going on? Okay, and this one is in the show too. This is his Zulu Warrior, and he loves African themes, and it has kind of an Art Deco feel that continues with this. Art Deco, the sources were, I didn't really go into this, but African art and African American art are really major sources, as well as Cubism, jazz. These are all things in Art Deco, and this later work that's later in the 40s really still has this kind of Art Deco feeling to it. Now, one interesting point I want to end with is that he never made a spear. This warrior does not have a spear. And what he did was he would take American flags, take the flag off, and use the pole as the spear. And that's what you'll see in the exhibition.